Good evening, good evening, good evening. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Seattle Boat Show Live. I am your co-host, Peter Schrappen of Northwest Marine Trade Association, coming to you from the friendly confines of Seattle, Washington, where the headquarters of NMTA is located. And there's Mark Bunzel, my co-host, and the Landons, my other co-host. Good evening, both, all.
Hey, Peter. Good to see you. And the Landons and I are in the Waggoner Guide International World Headquarters in Anacortes, Washington. And Landons, are you there?
We are here.
Yep. Good.
Yep. We're here.
They're heads down, both of them, preparing the 2022 Waggoner Cruising Guide. And it won't be available until December, but we're busy working on it, and 528 pages, another monster. So, well, Peter, we've got some news. What's been happening on the legislative front this week?
Yeah, well, maybe you've noticed this is campaign season for those municipal races. I know there's going to be a new Anacortes mayor. There's might be some new city council members and port commission races. So it's really those important local races that voters sometimes fall asleep and don't vote. We call it narcolepsy. They don't get to the end of the ballot, and we just really would encourage voters to actually see their way through the ballot. If you have any questions about whom to vote for, drop me a line at peter@nmta.net. But yeah, there was a campaign event last night, Mark. We're at Pacific Fisherman Shipyard, which has celebrated its 75th birthday last year. And we had every Seattle City Council candidate there, and we had every Seattle mayoral candidate there, except for Lorena Gonzalez. So Bruce Harrell had the mic for himself. And then we also had the Seattle City Attorney and the Seattle Port Commissioners, and they each got to speak for 2 minutes. And there was a timer, and it was awesome. Like there's over 100 people there. The food was incredible. It's a historic shipyard, and it was just nice to be outside in our natural habitat of kind of political dorks getting together. It's almost like the end of camp. You know, I know the weather's changing, which you're going to get to, Mark, in a little bit, but kind of that end of camp kind of dance minus the dancing. You're welcome on that front. So yeah, we had a good time, great food, and it's good to hear from candidates on maritime issues. And then I've been still at that free lunch route that I like so much, Mark, the gravy train. I didn't stop last night. I had a lunch today, the Port of Seattle State of the Port address.
Boy, Peter, you have the job. You get fed.
Yeah, well, you know, it's a hard knock life, Mark. So yeah, there was a luncheon at the Port of Seattle Jack Block Park in West Seattle, which is extremely far from where I live in Wallingford, given the West Seattle Bridge is out of commission. Commissioner President Peter Steinbrook delivered the keynote, and he was also there last night. It was excellent to hear from the port on other various activities. I wore my boating shirt to remind the port that they also have several marinas in their portfolio, which sometimes they don't think about as much as they should. So yeah, it was good for me to be there. And the thing about Commissioner Steinbrook, he's got a tough race this year. He's got an up and coming new person on the scene who's running against him. So we shall see how that breaks. I will say Commissioner Steinbrook signed on to an op-ed, Mark, in the Landons regarding the Harbor Patrol. We've talked about that last week with the Seattle Harbor Patrol on the chopping block with the Seattle City Council. So that op-ed that NMTA had a finger in writing was published on Monday, and I'll put that in the chat. So that's my update, Mark.
And we're going to have more on that on our Seattle Boat Show Live a week from tonight. We'll have
Kevin Hastings,
representative of the Harbor Patrol, actually to tell us more about it and tell us why it's so important. And I think many of the viewers will probably join on to this effort to make sure that the Harbor Police continue to be funded by the city of Seattle.
You know, it's interesting that a trade association and voters would be asking for more law enforcement. That's not typically the case with kind of your stereotypes of associations, but it's definitely the case with NMTA and RBA and others, where we really want a Harbor Patrol. We think that safe boating is fun boating. And we need enforcement out there for the yahoos who are not acting appropriately. So yeah, we're all in on Harbor Harbor Patrol, and as you've seen, hopefully in the last episode, and voter voice action alert that I'm sure everyone at home took advantage of and can continue to do so. Another part of law enforcement is around the whales, and I know, Landon's, you've been watching that issue, as have you, Mark. Lorena, is there some new whales information that came down the pipe this week?
Well, SR3, through some research and studies, discovered baby orcas, and Washington Fish and Wildlife put out an emergency news asking whale watching, commercial whale watching boats, as well as recreational, to be aware of the fact that babies are out there, and mothers and families, and to please keep at least 400 meters away from these whales, so the babies can survive and have a good chance of survival and feed and move about.
And then there was 400 yards away. And Mark, I think you had a number that was even further away than that, right?
Well, yeah, they're asking, when you see the baby, there's one baby in particular that they're watching carefully. Stay up to 1.5 miles away if you can manage that. Manage to understand 1.5 miles away. Then there's also two mama orcas that are out there that are pregnant, and we don't want to disturb their pregnancy. It's an alarming statistic as to how many pregnancies are lost by the orca whales. It's as high as 70%. So we're trying to give the orca a break, give them plenty of room, not confuse them with the sounds of our motors for our power boats, and maintain that distance. And Washington Fish and Wildlife thought enough about it to put an emergency directive in, as Lorena said, 400 meters. So I had a whale encounter on Labor Day. I may have mentioned this last week, but I was coming back from Roche Harbor through Pole Pass, and I heard on the radio there was two orca whales coming through Pole Pass. And I thought that was a little strange. You know, we go through Pole Pass all the time. It's a narrow opening. And sure enough, I slowed down, and right in front of my boat, two orca came through, and they're going through Pole Pass just like we do. They were headed west. I was headed east. And so I stopped, shut down, waited for them to pass, and off they went. And as soon as I went through Pole Pass, there were 3 whale watching boats ready to come behind the whales. So I feel for the whales. These whale watching boats, they must always hear them. And I'm sure they want their privacy so they can do their echolocation and find Chinook salmon that they like to eat. So even a little place like Pole Pass, they go right through.
Well, before we get to our guest, we have a couple of updates. As we all know, to enter Canada, we need our vaccination cards and proof of negative COVID test and go through the ArriveCan app. In addition to that, the latest news in BC, if you're local or a tourist, you need to have proof of vaccination now to go to restaurants that have table service and pubs and events of 50 people or more. So if you're planning to be touring around in BC, be sure you have your vaccination cards when you go to restaurants. Those outside the country should also have their passport with them for proof of identity. You don't need vaccination proof if you're going to a grocery store or a bank or a retail shop that you do for restaurants and pubs. So keep that in mind. And I understand King County is going to do something similar. Do you have more on that, Peter?
I most certainly do, Lorena. Yes. So today, King County Executive Dow Constantine laid out some new rules for King County events that really starts, it takes effect October 25th, I believe, but outdoor events with 500 people or more, I'm going to read from the press release here, 500 people or more, such as professional and collegiate sports and entertainment events, will require a vaccination or a negative test. Indoor recreational events or establishments will require the same. regardless of size, and restaurants and bars will require proof of vaccination as well. And so that's some big news that's coming our way in King County.
Okay.
Up in BC, in addition, the BC has put together an app apparently for the restaurateurs and also for event planners and people. And it's an app for them to collect information from the patrons that are coming in to make sure that they have a vaccination. And we don't know too much about this app, but again, it's an app for the restaurateur, the people that are running these establishments. Then on the other side of that, just be aware that there are some of the vaccination providers, we have that, where you can get an app that will download on your smartphone that will produce a QR code that will evidence your vaccination. So check with your vaccination provider and see if they have that available, because it does speed up the process, whether you're in King County or whether you're up in BC, and also for BC folks, it just makes it a lot faster for the people that are trying to get folks in and the people that are trying to run restaurants and events. So again, that's an app that you download. You get it from the provider of your vaccination, and it's more than that little piece of paper card. It's the QR code.
And then I think you had one other update here.
I do. This came out there. There's apparently, well, not apparently, there is. There's a study that's being conducted right now regarding the proposed or plans for the two bridges. One of them across to West Seattle, and this is for sound transit for the light rail. And one of them is to go over to West Seattle. The more important one, probably for boaters, is the one that goes to Ballard and north across the ship canal. And there's a proposal out now with information about their two plans for the one in Ballard. And there's an open period until October 15th for people to comment on this. Just on a high level, basically, they're proposing a bridge that would have pretty much a fixed height limitation of, I think it was about 136 feet. So what this really means is that ship canal passage beyond the existing Ballard Bridge would be limited to about 136 feet, if I read that right. But again, the important part is up until October 15th, you have the opportunity to comment on that. I'm going to put that in the chat here, the link for that to get to the study, and then also with information about where you can submit your comments on that. That's it.
And I think we're ready to bring on our guest, Malcolm Harker. We're so pleased to have him with us this evening. We actually met Malcolm in Vancouver, BC, in False Creek. We saw this gorgeous historic vessel at the same dock, and he invited us aboard and gave us a tour, which we thoroughly enjoyed. And I think Mark's seen the vessel as well. And yes. We learned that Malcolm actually is from a very interesting family, the Harker family of Harker's Engineering. They actually founded the engineering company in 1878, and the company built steam engines for tugs and launches and other vessels, including the 1906 fire boat called Fire King, which is now the Sarah Elizabeth Banks, which Malcolm converted into a pleasure craft. So he's here to tell us something about his background and this wonderful historic vessel. We have some slides. He's put together a slide presentation that we're going to bring up here. And
hi, Malcolm.
Are you ready?
I'm ready when you are. Show me the first slide.
All right.
You ready for me to bring this up, the slides?
I'm ready for you to bring it up.
Okay. We'll see if we can get this going here. And
okay, we're in the middle there. Okay, here we go. Right. I've promised to keep this to 20 minutes, and 10 minutes of that is a video that's already recorded. So I've got to keep my chat really quick. I've installed an engine telegraph. So when I call a telegraph, the slides will move on. So this is the history of the Fire King, which became the Fire King, which became the Sarah Elizabeth Banks. It's 140 years, 3 lives, 2 continents, but basically one family. Okay, this is orientation for everybody. This is England, according to, well, it's the British Isles, according to Google. But the bit we're interested in is the right-hand corner. It's called the northeast, which sailors will understand. And here we go. This is the northeast of England. And in the middle there, we see the great city of Durham, the county town of County Durham. Most famous for its great cathedral, founded in 1053 by St. Cuthbert and standing on the banks of the River Wear. TripAdvisor gives it 4.5 stars, and apparently it also accepts PayPal. Who knew? But the bit of Durham we're really interested in is County Durham, and this is about the 1850s, so it's 150, 170 years ago. All those black lines are all railway lines because the county of Durham, the land of the three rivers, the Tees at the south, the Wear in the middle, and the Tyne at the north, the land of the three rivers was also the birthplace of the railways, because all of those railways were basically connecting coal mines, or pits as we would call them, pit villages, to the rivers in the north and the middle and the south, so that massive amounts of coal from the Durham coalfield could be exported to all parts of England and elsewhere in Northern Europe. So further down the River Wear from lovely Durham Cathedral is the bit that matters for our point of view, and this is Sunderland. This is the city of Sunderland on the River Wear, and as you can see, it's shipbuilding, it's shipbuilding, and it's shipbuilding, and then as well as that, there's shipbuilding and marine engineering and engine works. In the middle of it is Joplin's Glass, where they made Pyrex, because to make glass you need furnaces, and furnaces need coal, and that's what they had loads of. This is the River Tees, the river to the south. The connection here is this is the river on which our family business was based, but as you can see, it's pretty much the same thing. Ships, 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 and people going to and fro to build ships. And here's where we meet my great-grandfather. In 1878, Francis Todd Harker moved to Stockton-on-Tees and established an engineering business for the manufacture of marine steam engines. And here he is, dressed in his Sunday best, alongside one of the largest engines, I would guess, they ever built, and justifiably proud of this magnificent piece of workmanship built by Francis Todd Harker, his three sons, a couple of three other guys with the most basic of machine tools driven by a line shaft with a steam engine at the end of it. How on earth they did all of that stuff, I have no idea. Just amazing. And here, the general arrangement of a fire boat, or a fire float as it was called. In the middle, you'll see F.T. Harker, engineer, Stockton-on-Tees, and at the bottom, you'll see H.H., the date in 1905. H.H. was my great-uncle Harry. This was a fire float for the River Wear to be a fire boat, which is where the story really starts. So my great-grandfather had the contract to build this vessel. The hull was actually built at another shipyard a little further south in Yorkshire, Henry Scar of Hessel on the River Humber. And here is the launch photograph of the hull of the Fire King floating high in the water because it had no machinery in it. Next off, the official photo, the official commissioning photograph. You can see everybody there, just as F.T. Harker was in his Sunday best. So everybody there is dressed up in their official uniforms. Towards the stern, you see Inspector Larkin, who was the head of the River Wear Watch, just as you were talking earlier about the fire patrol in Seattle. The River Wear Watch was in charge of everything on the river. There was a fire, it was their problem. There was a pirate, it was their problem. Somebody fell in the water, it was their problem. And this was the job of the Fire King for something like 50 years. See the portholes in the superstructure, we'll see them again. We've seen them before. And here we have the engine room of the Fire King, and two Harker compound steam engines with the companionway up to the aft deck. And this photograph is a complete fraud because it's not a photograph at all. It's actually a computer-generated image done by a guy called Mark Solander, who I met in the Madrona laundromat. But that's another story. This is the real photo, though. This is the fire pumps by Shand Mason of London. 2,500 gallons a minute. I'm told by people in the know, i.e. current Seattle firefighters, that 2,500 gallons a minute is a serious amount of water, even in present day terms. And this is why you needed it. Because you needed to fight big fires. This is the motor vessel or steam ship Ella Sayer carrying a load of esparto grass for the rope works on the River Wear, and the esparto grass caught fire. Since you've got boilers and coal, hot coal stuff there, not really surprising. In the front, you see the Fire King. Behind it, you see the Fire Queen. And behind that, you see the large paddle tug, Eppleton Hall. The remaining amazing thing about this photo from 1920s thereabouts is that of those 4 vessels, 2 of them are still afloat. The Fire King here in Seattle, and the Eppleton Hall, a big paddle tug, is now on display at Fisherman's Wharf in Seattle, of all places. So 2 survivors from 1920, both on the west coast of the United States. And dereliction of duty, but all good things come to an end. In the late 1950s, early 60s, both of the vessels, the Fire Queen and the Fire King, were decommissioned. The Fire Queen never left the river that it was commissioned and used on, but the Fire King, amazingly, had another life. That initial other life was a semi-derelict hulk and a couple of fishing villages, fishing ports, and seaside resorts on the coast of Yorkshire, namely Scarborough and Filey, where it was used as a liveaboard by people who couldn't afford somewhere real a liveaboard when they came to Scarborough or Filey for their holidays. And then it becomes the Viking. Doreen and Gerald Stink buy the hulk and decide they're going to put a monster sailing rig on it, and they're going to sail who knows where. They're going to sail the Mediterranean, they're going to sail to Australia. By the time they put the sailing rig on it, they figured that actually enough wind to move it forward was enough wind to turn it over, so they never actually got past the port of London, but they did a most amazing job. And in 1998, the same vessel showed up on the River Tees, basically like salmon spawning or orca going to breed where they breed. It got as close as it could to Harker's Engineering, who built the original engines, and I was told about it by one of the guys who works in our machine shop, Bill Sharp, and I went down and had a look, and there it was. You can also see there a replica of Captain Cook's first vessel, the Endeavour, which he sailed to Australia in, and all on the same river. So I bought the boat and did various things with it and didn't really know what to do with it until around about 2005, after I put a new house on it and various things. And times changed and end finally came for Harker's Engineering. So it was time to make a decision. What was I going to do with the rest of my life and with this boat, which I had accidentally purchased? The only boat that ever 50 tons, that's what you start with. Strip it out, and where was the 50 tons? Well, actually, it was about 25 tons of concrete in the bilges and sprayed up the side of ferro cement to stop the thing from leaking. And so it involved stripping everything out. Fortunately, there was still one shipyard left on the Tees, Aveco, and they didn't have a ship to build. So Dennis Abeling stood there looking at this crazy project. He agreed that he would replace it for me and put in a new keel and this, that, and the other. Stupidest thing I've ever done. If you ask me, I could build a new one for less. But anyway, he did what I asked. So Aveco rebuilt it, replated it, and it was then ready for its longest ever journey from the River Tees in the north of England to Puget Sound, where I was then living with my American wife, whose name will shortly be revealed. The flying boat, it arrived at the port of Vancouver, Washington, Easter Sunday on 2005, I think it was. All I had to do was arrange for a truck to come alongside, and the big heavy lift ship just picked it up, turned it around, put it down, no bother. And then to Townsend Bay Marine in Port Townsend, where a major refit started. New deck house, boiler being lowered in. And for the first time in 80 years, a Harker steam engine installed in a vessel. And here it is, pride of place inside the refinished hull, a Harker compound steam engine of approximately the same size and performance as the twin engines that originally drove the boat, which means there must have been about 125, 130 horsepower each, because it's about 250 horsepower that you need to get it to hull speed of 10 knots. And finally, after all the stuff's gone in, we're finally ready to put the lid on the house top, because basically everything went in through the house, but shoved into place. And when we're all done, put the lid on it. And ready for the launch. And here we have, on the left, Sarah Elizabeth Banks herself, our friend Carol Baker and a couple of other friends from Port Townsend with the new nameplates for the Sarah Elizabeth Banks, ready to come out the shop and in the water. And here we are, after 5 years and 6,000-mile journey, the vessel's finally ready to go back in the water. And there we are, Port Townsend, just after launch, a sunset shot. And so that's enough of the history for now. So now if we can figure things out, Katie's going to run a video for us, and finally you get a tour of the boat.
Sarah Elizabeth Banks. First question, what year is she? 1906 is when the story starts, but it gets complicated after that. Next question, what was it? Well, the clue's right there. It's a water cannon. It was a fireboat. Most folks get that, but some folks need a little more help. So the story starts in 1906, but the deck house started in maybe 100 years later, so that's part of the longer story. The blueprints, well, the blueprints, some of those go back a long way, but another favourite feature for folks. So let's go inside and see what there is. Well, we've got a helm, we've got a pretty old wheel, unfortunately it's not the original, and we've also got a genuine Peninsula and Orient Steam Shipping Company deck chair from circa who knows when. And then we got most of the modern stuff. Big speakers, we'll come back to those, but we got a nav station, we got an old binnacle compass, but big speakers and big magnets don't really help that much, so even more of them over here. And then we got another retro feature as a record player, which actually plays records. Born to Run, well, yeah. Bruce seems amused, where he might be. Let's see what else we got here. We got all the usual facilities. We got a sink, yeah, a sink, and we got a refrigerator, and we've got a nice dining table, and a ukulele, Sapele ukulele, matching all the other furniture. Sentinels of the Weir. That's the book about what it was and where it was. And then we come and look over here. There's Francis Todd Harker and his family, including my grandfather in amongst them, and they're sitting at exactly the same table. So, around we go, and on the other side we got drawers, just like they would have in 1906, but we got a microwave as well, which they probably wouldn't have in 1906, but something they would definitely approve of in 1906 is Yorkshire tea. And a teapot, a new invention since 1906, an electric kettle. So anyway, those would probably all be approved of. So let's go and have a look down below and see what they might approve or disapprove of down there. And here we are, down below. First thing we see down below is what everybody wants to see, a real old steam engine. This is a Harker and Sons steam engine from 1948, approximately, pretty much the same as me. But let's see what else we can see before we come back and see what it does. What else have we got here? Well, we've got a clock, and we got a radiator, and we got what would appear to be a boiler where the boiler originally was sitting. So let's see what else that we got, because the boiler isn't really the boiler, as is often the case. Things are not what they seem, and the boiler is in fact the shower and the head. It's quite a nice shower, it works quite well, and it's got flashing lights. And then we got the glass block where the companionway comes down, and we got a really nice glass sink as well, and a little skinny mirror for skinny people to check themselves out. So let's see what else we got. Heading aft. Well, what we got, going through the dim cabin into the engine room, what all the geezers want to see. And here we got a John Deere 4045 TFM, sitting exactly where one of the original steam engines would have sat. And then behind it, we've got a genset, which of course in 1906 there was no such thing. And we got an air compressor. They probably had those in 1906, but it'll be a lot bigger than this one. And then we got a heating system, diesel furnace, and instant hot water. And the second 4045 TFM, again sitting where the second of the two, the port steam engine, was sat, and the hydraulic tank. And of course, the steam engines is why we've got so much wonderful headroom in the engine room. So let's head forward again, back through the tool shed cabin and past a model of my great-grandfather's steam launch gondolier. He really liked Gilbert and Sullivan. Let's come back to the Steeman's engine. And this is what everybody likes to hear. Sing a beauty. Beautiful noise. Until steam, but the best air, but we all had a chuff eventually. So, that's when we need to lie down. Forward cabin, and a bit of luxury on the boat, semi-luxurious, with an inclinometer, and a drop-down sink. I'm told that came from a Pullman railway carriage. Did they have drop-down railway carriages? I didn't know that. Anyway, forward cabin, and another feature of the forward cabin is the stained glass windows, made from old glass plate negatives. My grandfather took a picture of every engine he ever made. At least my great-grandfather did. And then back up top, here we go. Rivets, 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 lots and lots of rivets. Always rivets, lots of rivets everywhere. And then let's head back up and out onto the deck. Original 1906, well, 1900 and something teak, 2.5-inch teak deck from the British Empire. They don't make them like that anymore. Empires or decks. That's the original rudder, turned into a table. Works out quite well. Okay, now a bit more contemporary Stairway to Heaven. I gave the guy who made it the Led Zeppelin album. He was quite amused. And up to the sacrilegious bit. This is the big top. And it's big and it's on top. There's a nice table in it. And it's actually made from a boat. It was a boat hull that I found and turned upside down, inside out, refinished it, and it turned out quite well. Kind of looks like a cathedral ceiling. The best thing is the view. You walk out here on the dock and you look all around. Motor yacht Falcon and cross tugs and a houseboat. Over there, beyond Falcon, western towboats, beautiful yellow and blue towboats, and beautiful place to sit on a summer evening, which this was until the sun went in. So, there we have it, and there it was. The Fire King, the Viking, the Sarah Elizabeth Banks, who've sailed in there. And God save the Queen.
Beautiful. We have a few more slides and then we'll take questions. And we'll get those up here in a minute.
Okay, if I'm back on, we're only 30 seconds behind schedule, amazingly enough. So, where have we been in the boat since I read it? Well, Glacier Bay, Alaska. That's this first shot in 2015. All the way up, all the way back.
Yep, just a second.
Yeah, it's working. It's a little slow here.
Okay, I'll stay there as long as you like. Okay, 2015 was the trip to Alaska. 2017 went around the outside of Vancouver Island. The interesting place for me, is one I really want to go to, is Nootka Sound, over one of the 5 sounds on the west side of Vancouver Island. And that's where my compatriot, Captain James Cook, who was born in the next village to where I grew up, first set foot on North American soil. In fact, it wasn't soil, it was rocks. But the amazing thing is, you go back to Nootka Sound now, and it's pretty much just like it was when Captain Cook landed there. This is Resolution Cove, where he careened the boat to fix a bunch of stuff. It just hasn't changed. The most amazing, timeless place. My favorite place of all. And more recent picture showing the latest aberration on the top. I see you put a shed on the top of the boat, said one of my boat building associates. Anyway, somewhere under the rainbow. This somewhere happens to be Fisherman's Harbour on Lopez last summer. It was just, there it was, the rainbow. So I took the picture. And the strangest picture of all, because on the way back from Alaska, we didn't want to go down the windy, blowy Johnson Strait, so we went round the back of West Thurlow Island and found ourselves in Sunderland Channel, of all places. So it's a misty day and it's clouds and this, that and the other. And then for a moment, the mist lifts and a spot of sunshine illuminates a strange boat in the distance crossing our bow. And then the mist came down again and it vanished into the mists of time. So that's it. That's the story. So now we get to the credits. First credit goes to Sentinels. Oh, sorry, back over, please. Sentinels of the Weir, written by Neil Mearns. This is the book that a lot of photos came from. It's the history of the River Weir Watch that was in charge of everything on the river. Captain Lakin and all his crew of folks. And it's a great book. It's available on Amazon, amazingly enough. F.T. Harker, engineer and builder, Stockton-on-Tees, my great-grandfather. That's an original maker's plate. It's in amongst the family. Heirlooms. And so I decided I should do myself a maker's plate, because after all this time I discovered I wasn't really a very good businessman ever. I might have done it, so I did it, but what I really am is an engineer, because what I get up in the morning to do is to make stuff. It doesn't have to be much, but I'm a Yorkshireman and I've got to crack on. And now we roll the final credits. Beauty and the Beasts. Sarah Elizabeth Banks herself, this was our wedding day. Sitting down, my grandfather, Hubert Harker, to Sarah's left, to our left, Fred Harker, my father. And on the right, that's me, long time ago with more hair than I've got now. Beauty and the Beasts. And the final credit, everybody whose name I haven't mentioned yet should be on this final bit. Put on your sailing shoes.
Excellent. You engineered your presentation as well as you did your vessel. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah. It was great. We're looking in chat here to see the questions. I have a question. Did I hear you say the vessel went to Vancouver, Washington?
It was shipped. Yes, it was shipped on the Star Java, a big heavy lift ship, and it went from Vlissingen in Holland through the Panama Canal to Vancouver, Washington, where it was offloaded onto a truck and then trucked straight up to Port Townsend, where it spent the next 2 years.
No trouble going over the Columbia Bar with a large ship.
Oh, well, I don't think it bothered that ship.
No.
So what was the inspiration to convert her?
Well,
project.
it was all a complete accident, really, because the boat just showed up on the river, and this Bill Sharp, one of our fitters, told me, he said, "Oh, the Fire King that your great-grandfather built the steam engines for, it's down on the river." And I'd never heard of the boat. I knew nothing about it, but I knew Bill Sharp knew what he was talking about. So if Bill Sharp thought it was important, I had to go look at it. And so accidentally, the first boat I ever bought weighed 50 tons and was 80 years old.
What about any special maintenance requirements with the hull, mainly the hull, that it's, this dates back quite a while, before?
Yeah, most of it's been replated with steel, but there's still some original iron. And one of the insurance requirements is that I have it audio gauged or ultrasonic tested every 5 years. So that's one of the things I have to do. So I have to find somebody who knows what they're looking for and can make sense of it all. And I've managed it once, and I'm hoping in a couple of years' time, when it's next due, I'll be able to manage it again. But it's all in pretty good shape because the steel, what was originally 3/8 iron, most of it is now 3/8 steel. And Dennis Abling, he had some half-inch plate left. He said, "Well, you're going to put ballast in the bottom in the build, so I might as well make it a half-inch steel, mightn't I?" So the bottom is half-inch steel. You could balance it on a stick and nothing had happened. I know, because I balanced it on a rock and nothing happened.
We have a question in the chat. Where is the Fire King moored now?
It's on the Ship Canal, Ewing Street moorings, the Rotten Boat Centre, right next to Foss Tugs. It's between the Fremont and Ballard bridges on the south side, just right up by Seattle Pacific University.
And how often do you take her out, and where do you go?
Mostly just in the summer. Typically we go out for 6, maybe 8 weeks in the summer, but with the recent restrictions, not being able to go to Canada and stuff, this year we just went out for two-week trips. A 2-week loop up in the San Juans and back by La Cona, which is one of our favorite places. And then we just did a 2-week loop into the South Salmon, which we really love because it's nothing and nobody. You go places there where nothing's changed for 100 years. We love Long Branch out on the Key Peninsula, where it's still 1964.
Do you have any other plans as far as enhancements, or are you pretty much happy with what you've?
Oh no, I'm a shipbuilder, not a sailor. I mean, I've learned to sail it. I just did the 2,000-hour service on the engines at 5 knots. That means I've been 10,000 miles in it, so it's got quite a lot of miles under the hull. It's been way further as the Sarah Elizabeth Banks than it ever went. There's the Fire King, which never left the river, and the Viking, which never got further south than London. So actually, I've been quite a long way in it, but I still regard myself as a shipbuilder, a builder and engineer, like the Maker's Plate says, rather than a sailor.
Malcolm, what does she draw? You said you go to La Cona. I can just imagine seeing her going up the Swinomish Channel.
It only draws 4 foot because it was built as a riverboat.
Ah, okay.
So it's pot-bellied, almost flat bottom. I think, what do you call it? You call it the dead rise or something. It's about 8 inches. The bottom's nearly flat. So if you hit the wave, it makes a bloody big banging noise, but doesn't do any harm to anything.
And you took quite a bit of ballast out of it. Did that change its characteristics, or did you not need as much ballast?
All the concrete ballast that Gerald and Doreen Sprink had put in, partly to stop it leaking. I took all that concrete out, but basically I ended up putting 6-8 tons of concrete back in just to bring it back to the load line, because it is now,
okay.
The nominal original spec was 4-foot draft. From the photos originally, it was low at the stern because the engines were in the wrong place, because the fire department wanted all their middle space for the fire pumps and stuff. So it sat down at the stern, and now finally, when I got it redone, I actually managed to get the calcs right, and it now draws a level 4.5 foot draft, courtesy of 8 tons of concrete in the bilges.
Wow.
Any special requirements from Coast Guard for the unique vessel, or?
Well, the only special requirement, not because of the vessel, the only special requirement is that because I'm a Brit with a green card, I can't actually own it, because the Jones Act says that vessels over 5 tons, American vessels, can only be owned by Americans. And since I'm not an American, I can't own it. But the Coast Guard also said that seeing as I'm married to an American, there's a community property state, the vessel can be deemed to belong 50% to Sarah Elizabeth Banks herself, and she can be deemed to have the larger 50% than my 50%, and therefore it can be an American flag vessel. Go figure.
There you go.
Got that.
That's important stuff. Don't forget that.
Yes.
Good question.
All right, do you have really good fire suppression on the Fire King? Just kidding.
Well, I have behavioural suppression because, as you saw in the video, there is a fire pump on the front. And although it's not connected to anything, people approaching the vessel don't necessarily know that. So if I point it at folks, they will generally do what I want them to do or not do what I don't want them to do. But other than that, in terms of fire suppression, yeah, I've got the regular fire extinguishers and an automatic system in the engine room, just the usual stuff. But of course, steel doesn't burn. So every other boat on our dock at Ewing Street moorings could be toast or whatever the lumber equivalent of toast is. And I'd probably still just be sitting there with some smouldering epoxy up top.
Interesting.
You still have family in England.
My family mainly is my sister, who's lived in Portugal for all her adult life. So in terms of family in England, some cousins, but in terms of the Harkers in England, I'm the last of that line.
We have another question in chat. How fast does it cruise?
Oh, how fast does it cruise? Hull speed is 9.9 knots, and I generally cruise at 7.5 knots. To get up to 10 knots, actually. To get up to that, I need both of the engines going at full tilt boogie, so it's about 250 horsepower. But at 7.5 knots, I can cruise comfortably with the engines on only 2/3 revs and just burning total of like 3.5 gallons an hour. So it's relatively economical for a big boat, as long as you don't try and go any faster than walking pace.
Well,
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more question in the chat. Being that it's a riverboat, how does it handle in the rough weather? Which I know that's right around the horizon here. In the
Well,
Puget
yeah,
Sound area.
We were going to go to Bremerton on Saturday to see one of my favourite honky-tonk bands, Marty Stewart and the Fabulous Superlatives, but I'm not interested in going into 4-foot wind waves. I did it once, and the boat's fine, there's no problem with the boat, but I'm an old guy and I don't want to sit in a tumble dryer for 2 hours.
For those of you who don't know, if you are planning on going out boating this weekend, or take a look at the weather. We've got gale warnings, winds over 34 knots, up to 45, and it'll be out of the southeast. And it's going to get pretty lively out there. I'm headed out tomorrow to Roche Harbor on the Washington State ferries, and right about the time that system moves in. So it'll be interesting to see how the ferries handle it in the San Juan Islands. So I'll report back on that next week. I'll be headed out to the Grand Banks rendezvous. So we've got about 75 Grand Banks boats that are in Roche Harbor this weekend, having a good time.
Good update there, Mark. I know the boats afloat's going on as well. If you're going to be in the Lake Union area, stop on by. That's run by the Northwest Yacht Brokers Association. That runs through Sunday the 19th. That's always a fun place to be as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting with the weather. I'm going to try to get there Saturday. Sunday looks like it's going to be the better day, so I may wait till Sunday and have a little better weather than Saturday, but we'll take a look.
And Landon, do you want to say something about next week's show with the Sergeant Kevin Hastings? I know we talked about it a little bit, but
Yes.
why don't you tee it up?
Sergeant Kevin Hastings of the Seattle Harbor Patrol will be with us next week, and he's going to share his stories and experiences and why it's important to have patrol on Lake Washington, Lake Union, and around the Seattle area, the importance of keeping our waters safe. And he will be joining us next week. And I want to thank you again, Malcolm, for excellent presentation, fascinating history, very interesting. I know you spent a lot of time putting it together. Thank you for being our guest. And look forward to seeing you out on the water, hopefully, or in Seattle.
And say hello to Sarah Banks, Sarah Elizabeth Banks for us, the person.
I will do when I finally see her again at the end of October. In the meantime, I have her artwork behind me to remind me of her.
That's outstanding. Thank you, Malcolm. We really appreciate it. Appreciate you being on Seattle Boat Show Live. And that's going to wrap it up for everybody. And so have yourself a good weekend. And if you do go out boating, please be very careful out there. So with that, Peter, the Landons, myself, and Malcolm, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.